Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. You are listening to the flagship audio production of Light Reading, and we cover the entire world of communications. This is Phil Harvey. I'm an editor at Light Reading, and I am joined on this podcast by my colleague Kelsey Zeiser for this episode that was recorded on March 11th. Our guest today is Mari Silbey of US Ignite, and we will discuss the most recent developments in the world of smart cities, how carrier strategies and approaches for smart cities have changed. We will also cover a need for network testing that's been created by the government's plan to spend $1 billion to accelerate the development of Open RAN, Open Radio Access Network technology in the U.S. So the government did this as a response to Huawei's worldwide dominance in 5G equipment and technology. They want to mount some sort of quick response, and so throwing $1 billion toward Open RAN seemed like a good idea. We will get into that and what testing need that creates and how some agencies are fulfilling that need. And you will get all of that and a little bit more right after the break. All right, let's welcome our guest to the Light Reading Podcast. Today's guest is a former Light Reading editor, and now she is directing corporate communications over there at US Ignite, which is a nonprofit of some size and estimation. I have the hardest time describing what US Ignite is, but please welcome Mari Silbey.
It is good to be back. Thanks for having me.
And you must tell us what US Ignite is in the official way, because I would butcher it. I would say something like they're arming cities with robot scooters.
I like it. I like it. Robot scooters and flying robots too.
No,
that's the other one we do.
That's exciting.
No, we're a high-tech nonprofit based out of Washington, D.C., and we are accelerating smart cities by working across the communities themselves, working across the industry, which needs a path to economic and commercial growth there, and then also working with the academic sector and with federal agencies to advance the wireless and networking technologies that are going to make all of this possible.
Okay, Kelsey, did you get all that?
Let's just go back to high-tech nonprofit, smart cities.
Well, we do have smart cities related topics. Recently on the site, Mike Dano, our ace reporter covering 5G and all that implies, said that put a story out that talked about reorganizations inside of Verizon and AT&T, in particular with leading executives that were previously kind of taking, or actually in one case still are taking charge of the smart cities business for those respective carriers. So I guess my question is the carrier business for smart cities, is that changing or being kicked down the road a bit? Is it taking longer to materialize? I'm wondering from your side, since you're meeting with cities and seeing these things close up, what's changed?
Sure. Well, I think there's always an overestimation of how bullish a market it's going to be, and everybody jumps in and says, "Oh, we can make lots of money." And the long-term prospects are still good, and we can go into some of those. But certainly the idea that there's a quick win or a get-rich-quick scheme is not the case. And one of the things I thought was interesting about the article was it focused on small cells, and that is obviously the connectivity piece is what layers all of this together and holds it together, but that is only one piece of the smart city puzzle. Mm. And if we focus on that for just a minute, because I do want to expand beyond that, but if you want to talk about the small cell side, there was that whole analogy of why carriers should even work with the cities at this point now that the FCC ruling has come down. And,
right, yeah.
Why do they have to make nice? And honestly, the answer is this is still in legal jeopardy. This is still in legal limbo. And, the Ninth Circuit is, potentially going to hand back some rollbacks of this. Nobody really knows. And if it does, if there do end up being rollbacks, if a new administration comes in the fall, nobody really knows how much the carriers are going to have to give and take.
Oh, is there an election this year?
So I've heard.
Okay.
I do
All
live
right.
in DC, so I'm
Just
probably oversensitive.
yeah, maybe it's just happening here.
I live under a rock, so I haven't.
I think it's safer there right now. Now. But even if even if you take the legal piece out, it's not like the carriers don't still have to work with the cities. There's still always going to be negotiation. Yeah. The cities can still decide whether or not to be a thorn in their side, even if there are certain things they don't have the leverage to negotiate anymore. Mm-hmm. So the idea that the carriers should just stop paying attention at all on the small cell front because the FCC says they can go in and do whatever they want is really short-sighted. And I don't think, quite honestly, I don't think that's how most people are approaching it. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely in the discussion.
Okay, well that clears it up somewhat.
Maybe they're kind of reducing their smart cities organizations within the carriers. Get like shifting some of those executives to other roles, or just making it a smaller group but not getting rid of it altogether. Is that what you're thinking, Mari? Or
well, it's interesting. Like I've heard it positioned in different ways, and so you never know quite how to take what that corporate speak really means. Some folks are talking about it as it's being absorbed back into the larger organization of whatever these larger service providers are, because it gets treated essentially as this is a long business, and it's not just a thing that we're dabbling in anymore. It is an actual thing, long-term strategy piece that we see as important to our business. How much of that is truth or just the way they want to spin it is up for debate. But from my perspective, there is definitely a long game to be played here, and there's some short wins along the way, I think, for any kind of service provider, carriers, both wireless, both telecom and cable, in terms of connecting certain applications and certain things that are going to deliver return in the near term. Street lights, kiosks, traffic management systems.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is that this stuff is not. I know it came down with 5G small cells as like the catalyst to kind of kick off a round of these discussions, but we kind of were going down the smart cities path one way or the other. Cities do need to have more effective traffic control, parking, monitoring of city assets and and rights of way and things of that sort.
And certainly there are higher ups in a lot of these companies, again, both cable and telco, that recognize the longer term of it's not just about having a single product to sell. It's about the fact that ultimately cities, communities are big consumers of connectivity, and we want to be there as a service provider because down the line, again, the cities can either choose to be a thorn in our side, or we can treat them like a customer because they are consumers of our product in one form or another.
Yeah, so it's definitely an evolving business within the carriers. It's definitely not going away. I think, but I do think the turnaround time for when they are going to, maybe the carriers aren't going to be this sort of Accenture type, come to us and do everything through us organization.
It's very unclear.
Yeah.
I think some of them thought that they would be, and I think some of them may still think that they're going to be. But it's, that's not clear to me.
Yeah. All right.
Mari, do you have any, case studies of certain cities that are doing an awesome job of becoming smarter? Or and also, are there any new recent applications out there? I think last time we talked about monitoring where tires were getting disposed of.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It was impressive. Right. That was an impressive example. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a couple things, and I'll keep it short, but one of the things that I've heard for all the cities that are deploying more cameras, and that's has whole other issues and layers to unpack there, if you will. But anytime you deploy a camera and are streaming any information from that camera, that takes up guess what? A whole lot of bandwidth.
Sure does.
And those data services, that's not a one-time cost. That's going to continue to scale up as cities add, or communities or whoever adds more and more cameras. And the other thing, so that's not a specific community, that's just sort of a general statement. But one of the other things that I've seen more and more of is how communities are using drones in different applications. And that is certainly going to have an impact on streaming video and on bandwidth and connectivity usage. And the one example I'll give is there's a city in California called Chula Vista. And if you go searching for it, there's some videos online too that are really, really fascinating. And they're using drones actually as a supplement to their police force, which is terrifying in the abstract. All I can do is think of sci-fi movies and, drones.
Black Mirror.
I know, scanning our irises and whatever.
We don't need to chase bank robbers anymore.
Right.
Just send the drones.
But in this case...
A cop approached me while I was out walking today. Did you hear some gunshots nearby? And I was like, yes, I did. He's like, do you know where they came from? And I'm like, I don't know. So I guess a drone would be,
over there.
helpful in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, so in Chula Vista, they had a particularly low per capita police force per capita, so they were not able to get to as many 911 calls as quickly as they needed to be getting to them. And what the drones have done is they've reduced the response time so that a drone can get there in something like, their average response time is somewhere around 3 minutes, as opposed to a patrol car, which is more like, I think, 7. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But the idea is that the drone can go there, can provide intelligence to an officer en route,
Right.
and potentially prevent an in-neighborhood man chase kind of situation. And there's some videos online if you want to go take a look. So they are using drones. They have done a huge amount of public engagement to make that palatable, and it seems to be working in that case.
Chula Vista, city of the future.
Yeah.
That's a slogan I'm working on behalf of the city. But
I like it.
I'll workshop it. We'll see if it works.
Yeah, don't drop your day job.
That's better than keep Raleigh boring or...
Or for my city, it's Fort Worth. Yes, we still have cows. Yeah. All right. On that note, let's go on a quick break, and when we come back, we want to talk about
Move on over
things.
to the break.
Oh, Kelsey. All right, we'll be right back on the Light Reading Podcast. Welcome back to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Phil Harvey. Joining me as ever is Kelsey Zeiser. Hello, Kelsey.
Hello, Phil.
And joining us is our former Light Reading colleague and now Director of Communications at US Ignite, Mari Silbey.
I don't think I can beat Kelsey for enthusiasm. Hey, everybody.
It's tough to ratchet it up like that.
This is Mari. She's kind of a big deal.
That's a good. That's fair. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so for whatever reason, Mari wanted to talk about ORAN. No, this actually is an ongoing discussion inside of Light Reading because we recently reported on obviously the race to 5G is kicking off in weird ways inside U.S. companies and inside the government. The government's there was recently a Senate bill introduced. I forget the senator's name, but he wanted to put aside some money, $1 billion. I think it was $700 million plus some other amount to fund developments in ORAN so that the U.S. could come closer to developing some kind of 5G radio access network without Huawei being involved. So this is all anti-Huawei legislation.
And ZTE, don't forget
And ZTE, but mostly they're targeting Huawei because it's the world leader in 5G RAN radios shipped and deployed. And it's interesting because one of the first things that I think Mike Dano wrote that story as well, and I think actually Ian started it, and then we've covered it since then. But one of the first things that Mike actually mentioned was he was like, and he actually followed this up in a different story, was, is $1 billion even remotely close to enough money to fund that kind of research and development that quickly? So where's your head on all this stuff, Mari? You're watching this stuff in terms of the development of ORAN, but what's the particular interest in this for US Ignite
Sure.
or government agencies?
Yeah. No, so it's Senator Mark Warner, by the way. It's a bipartisan bill that's been introduced, as you said, to put $1 billion potentially into accelerating, or up to $1 billion to accelerate the ORAN development. And yeah, from first listen, man, that sounds like a drop in the bucket. I mean, if you think about what it takes to be a Nokia or an Ericsson or an actually well-supported provider of communications equipment that's going to go, into national scaled networks. So yes, I agree with the discussion that it's a small amount of money in the scheme of things. But the other thing I find interesting about it is it's the federal government saying essentially go fund upstart tech to disrupt the vertically integrated equipment model. And that's going to go across, I mean, the carriers on the one hand love this idea because they never want to be tied to their, one
Right.
specific, again, vertically integrated vendor.
Yep.
But there's a whole ecosystem of providers and industry that's got a fair bit of sway, let's just say, in DC, in the halls of where things get done or don't get done sometimes, oftentimes. And the question is, how is that whole cohort reacting to the idea that the federal government, again, wants to come in and fund something that would be disruptive to existing business models, not just Huawei and
Right.
ZTE,
Yeah.
but also other companies.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It is interesting. From our perspective, part of the reason we're watching it too is we've continually been interested in how far some of the open source, the concept of opening some of these pieces up within the radio network are going to go. Again, the carriers have always been pushing for this,
Right.
but there's a lot of trade-offs they're not willing to make. And one of the interesting things is going to be to see how viable anybody in this business can make some of these solutions so that they could actually potentially be competitive with anything that's out there today. And from our perspective, you need a place to be able to test some of these things. You need a place to be able to run some of the software orchestration stacks, a place to configure and test with different equipment, different software and hardware configurations, and through our Platforms for Advanced Wireless research program, POWER, we have that, and it's a combination of research institutions and folks on the super academic geeky side. It's the 30 plus wireless industry folks, so it's definitely
Right.
has the industry representation, but it's a place for all of these parties to potentially come together and test some of these new software options in a place that is a scaled network and not just in a lab.
Yeah, that makes sense. So your interest then is in sort of watching this develop as it pertains to not just the research and development, funding, but also the testing part.
Right. How does that research and development testing get done?
Right.
How
Yeah.
do they answer some of this is hard stuff. There's not a lot of people who are doing this right now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do they work through the knotty problems of making this stuff work? And there's not a lot of good answers.
You said naughty, like with knots, not
Right.
naughty, like
No.
like
K,
bad
K-N-O.
bad problems.
Bad problems.
No, the weird thing about the testing part is that interoperability is one of those things carriers won't budge on.
Yeah.
They know they know what they have, they know what their assets are. they need stuff to interoperate and they need it to work first time through. And Ericsson and Nokia and all the ones that are in that space already know this, and that's what they're constantly having their feet held to the fire. So how do you kind of replicate that? And I guess the testing game is going to have to be raised considerably for that to happen, for some of these upstarts or smaller companies or medium-sized companies that are just kind of getting into Open RAN.
You all mentioned earlier that it's kind of a drop in the bucket as far as how much money that they're willing to throw at this, and if these companies are already pretty small, like what impact will that really make in the long run to have that funding?
I mean, it really does come down to which company's technology they end up backing or pushing ahead.
Yeah, and yes, it does. And I also wonder how and where the carriers decide to throw their weight also potentially behind, because they have an interest in this.
Yeah. It like most things in this business, it'll come from the top down. It'll be a large carrier deciding. And I got to say, probably an AT&T, because they've been one of the more aggressive and progressive at the same time dealing with open source.
That's true.
And really kind of pushing their vendor ecosystem around to get them to the point of actually using open source components, what they call decomposing network functions and stuff like that, which sounds like they're going away, but they just mean making them more modular.
If you throw government money at it and then the carriers also, or a carrier puts its weight behind it, what is that? Does that give it enough?
And then the other big hanging question there is, again, isn't this a little too late in terms of, if you really want to compete with Huawei, this was the thing that had to have happened 5 to 10 years ago.
Well, what's interesting to me is I think that the Huawei scare is a good catalyst for some of this, but these issues are still going to be, take aside whatever your, prejudice is against, a particular company. These issues, it's not just 5G, but a lot of these technologies are going to continue to be a part of whatever the next generation of wireless is.
Right.
So these are still problems to work through and to solve, regardless of whether or not it helps with the current situation, which, you're probably right.
No, there's going to be a huge need for advanced wireless testing on into the future, because even after this little thing, this dust up finishes, 5G is going to be around for a long time. So there's going to need to be ways to prove this stuff before going to market. Kelsey, we are at about the 10-minute mark for this segment. Are there any other burning questions we have for Mari?
Yeah, I think the most important question we have for Mari is, are scooters going to ruin our cities? And have you tried one? Where do you stand on the scooter debate?
Oh, they're everywhere here in DC, by the way.
That's a semi-smart city question.
It's a semi-smart city. I have not ridden one, and I've been meaning to for so long, and now I'm just like continuing to psych myself out of it. I definitely want to do it in some kind of controlled environment first, so that when I fall on my face, nobody's around to point and laugh.
Like in one of those, McDonald's ball pits.
Oh my God! I just had the most vivid flashback to my childhood. I have not. I have the feeling though that once I get over my fear of trying it one time, I actually think I will totally love scooter riding, and it may destroy the world for pedestrians, but bring them on, man! Bring on the scooters.
I have certainly tried them, and I think that what they don't tell you, people use them on the sidewalk all the time, and you're not supposed to, and that's bad. So don't ride them on the sidewalks. However, what keeps me off of them mostly, especially inside most downtown areas, not Fort Worth. Fort Worth's main downtown is pretty protected, but the bike lanes have to be really enforced, because the scooters should logically use the bike lanes. But what happens in some cities is the bike lanes are more of a suggestion, and then you end up with a scooter out there battling traffic, and that's no fun.
Do you know we actually have there's an application that won a contest here in DC that US Ignite helped to run that challenge, called Our Streets, and one of the things the app does is it lets you report on bad behavior, essentially. Take pictures and report bad behavior, things like
Oh boy.
like cars blocking bike lanes.
Yes.
You know,
Don't scooter snitches get stitches?
Yeah, they do. They do. They get their apps taken away.
Oh, wow. I think that's a really good way to leave now.
I think it's I think Mari's signaling. She's giving me the choke symbol, and then she's doing the slash across the throat. So I guess it's time for us to go.
Literally walking out of the room.
That's right.
Bye, Phil. Bye, Kelsey.
All right. Well, Kelsey, as ever, thanks for doing what you do and saying what you said. And Mari, thanks so much for being our guest.
Thanks for having me.
We will be with you all next time on the Light Reading Podcast. That is it. That's our show. Thanks to Mari Silbey for her time and insights, and thanks to Kelsey for her quips and questions. Thanks so much to our production crew, Tian, for making us sound good, and I would say look good, but let's just keep it within the realm of the possible here. Thanks to you, dear listener, because if you weren't paying attention, we would not be able to get away with doing all of this at work. And everyone, please tell a friend to subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Light Reading Podcast.